very warm welcome to you all. In countries across the world, offices have emptied because of coronavirus. But for many of those firms, it's business almost as usual. Are we going through a remote working revolution? This is Roundtable. So hello from me, David Foster. Coronavirus is keeping millions of people away from their usual places of work, and for many, that has stopped them doing their jobs. That isn't the case for everybody, though, with workers logging in remotely, sometimes even if they're in self-isolation.
One of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic is that more and more people are working from home. From the US to Europe, Asia to Australia, millions of people are working remotely for the first time. Although working from home is still not an option for people who do physical work, it might prove revolutionary for others. According to research by the American Economic Association, the benefits of working from home include increased productivity, rated by both employees and supervisors. A study has shown a 13% increase in performance for employees working from home. However, remote working has its downsides too. Analysis has shown that working from home for more than 2.5 days a week could negatively affect relationships with co-workers and harm knowledge sharing. Another significant issue is maintaining boundaries with home life. It can be hard to switch off, particularly when we don't have a dedicated home office. Remote workers often put longer hours in, with 48% of employees increasing their working time, according to one study. So will the coronavirus lead to a remote working revolution?
Well, let us say hello, first of all, to Erica Wolfe-Murray, author of Simple Tips, Smart Ideas. She's in Oxford. In New York, upstate New York, Brad Bell, Professor of HR Studies at Cornell University, joins us. And in London, we say hello to John Ostler, Chief Executive of the Online Business Finder. That makes up our three guests. Great to have each one of you. I know you do a little bit of work from home and a little bit of work from the office, depending on what suits you. But Erica, let me come to you first of all. You've done a top 10 of, if you're working from home, a top 10 of the things you need to do. Give us some of the most important of those.
I think to give yourself structure in the day is one of the most critical things. To have a proper diary so you can settle down, work out what you're going to do today, and work your way through it.
Not everybody's that organised.
But when you work from home, you need to be. Then one of the other things is to really get yourself a good workstation. Make sure that you're comfortable where you're working, that it's an easy, relaxed place, and you've got all the bits and pieces you need to hand. Another thing to do is to get up and get away from your desk and walk round, perhaps settle yourself in another corner for a bit to do a bit of work and then go back to your desk. Lots of fresh air if you can get it. Go outside, stretch your legs. All of those sorts of things are really important.
And when do you get round to work?
Once you've got yourself sorted, of course. But people like to work in different ways and at different times, and it's really important to find out how you like to work when you're working from home, because you're not in an office structure and you're therefore not being forced to work in other people's ways, but you need to find your own.
Okay, John, I suggested to Erica that not everybody's that organised. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily suit everybody, does it?
That's certainly true. I think some people thrive on work from home, and there's a lot less distractions. And if you've got a role that requires a lot of concentration, then it can be very beneficial. If you're the sort of person that gets energy of other people, like the dynamics of in-person contact, then I think work from home can be a challenge.
Yeah, you see, Brad, the thing is, some people love coming into the office, some people hate it. So how do you make yourself into a person who fits into both of those environments, would you say?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's tough for people to kind of go back and forth. I think, as other speakers said, what we find is that I think some people really thrive on that office environment, that face-to-face interaction, working, side by side with their peers. Some people definitely have more of a preference to work at home for a variety of reasons. It might be personal because they have family or other things that they need to take care of. It also might be productivity. We know that working from home, people tend to be interrupted less frequently. They're somewhat immune from office politics. So I think it's really kind of the individual difference, and people have different preferences.
You see, you said they're not interrupted as frequently. There's not so much office gossip, and yet the general assumption I would say is that employers are rather frightened of letting their employees off the leash and having this freedom, if you like.
hmm Absolutely. I think there's a strong, you might call it a myth that, when people work at home, they're not as productive. And in fact, the research says otherwise. It shows that in general, people that work remotely perform as well as or often better than their office-based counterparts. They tend to, again, be interrupted less frequently. They tend to be absent less often. If they have a cold, where they might not have wanted to come into office, they can still work at home and get at least some of their work done. So there's real benefits, I think, to working from home that a lot of employers maybe overlook due to their view of what traditional working looks like.
Eric, I would suggest one of the bonuses as well here is that you save a bit, don't you? You don't have to get to the station, you don't have to pay for train fare, you can cook your lunch at home, etc., etc.
That's absolutely right. And you've effectively, if you've got an hour commute both ways, you've saved 2 hours that you don't have to be sitting on public transport or in your car or whatever. But Brad's absolutely right. All the research shows that productivity goes up, which really belies the myth of office managers saying that people can't work from home. And I think actually one of the really interesting things that will emerge from this when the coronavirus issue and working from home so much for so many of us has passed is how many more people will start working from home and how it's actually going to change the whole working dynamic.
Oh, absolutely. It might well be the end of the traditional nine to five. John, you're nodding.
Well, I think that the work from home sort of popularity has been growing over the last few years as the technology has sort of allowed it to be far more effective. With video conferencing that we're experiencing now, but messaging systems as well, and collaborative, shared documents. So it's a lot easier to do work from home now than it was even a few years ago. And I think with this forced experiment with everyone working from home, at least all the office workers working from home, as we've discussed, I think that's going to be an acceleration of what was naturally happening, naturally occurring.
You see, of course, these are unusual times, aren't they? And if you're working from home, you may have a million distractions that you wouldn't otherwise have. Is the danger here, perhaps, that employers don't notice the uptick in productivity that we've talked about because people, A, aren't used to it, and secondly, they're getting disturbed a bit more? Brad, you're nodding.
Absolutely. I think this could go both ways. I think on the one hand, it will bust some of those myths. It'll open people's eyes to opportunities to expand remote work where maybe they didn't think it could be done. I think the flip side of that is this isn't really an ideal setting for remote work. We know that, companies that do it well, for example, make sure that there are childcare plans in place so workers aren't working while they're also caring for children. That's not the reality right now. We also know that companies that do it well, train employees and managers on how to work remotely. They put into place different infrastructure, whether that's the right technology. It might be online communities so these employees can connect with one another and prevent isolation. So I think the risk here is maybe it won't be a great experience for at least some, and it might actually turn people off maybe somewhat unfairly because it's not a good, accurate
and not just the bosses. It might turn off the people who are doing the work as well, because they might think, I'm sorry, I'd rather get in the train, avoid all of this hassle and just get to a desk.
Absolutely.
I think it is.
Yeah, Erica, yeah.
Going back to Brad's point about isolation, I think it's really important that when people are working from home, that actually they don't use the telephone. To go back to John's point about teleconferencing, we are all used to seeing everybody's faces when we're working with them, and therefore it's much more important that instead of just having 2 or 3 telephone calls in the day, you see people's responses. So you use those, whether you're using FaceTime or whatever, you use those things so you're actually seeing people's faces. Because if we're not allowed to go out into the streets, or we're discouraged from that, we are herd animals, and we respond to physical stimuli as much as auditory. So we really
It's fascinating you should say that, because it was suggested with all of this business going on at the moment that if I had to work from home, I would do this essentially via Skype, but like a radio show, and I wouldn't really see the people to whom I was talking. And I'll tell you what, just looking at your faces, your wonderful faces, the smiles, the happiness that you're generating for being on this show, it makes my job a lot easier.
Well, it's who we are as humans, and I think it's so important, therefore, that everybody takes time to see each other, whether it's working or in fact family and friends. But another point that I think is also key, bearing in mind that some people are going to have children at home, and they're going to be working at home with children and their partners, is to really work out when in the day you work best with your partner, and try and ring fence that so that you can maximize that time. I'm commonly regarded as a lark because I like doing my work really early in the morning. So I'll wake up at 5 o'clock and work from sort of maybe 5 till 9. But in those 3-4 hours, I can absolutely crash through work. Whereas, your partner may be much better later in the day and much more comfortable working in the evening. So I think.
And what happens when you want to video conference somebody just down the road at 5:45 in the morning?
Well, I have sent people emails at 2 o'clock in the morning and had responses, and they were UK based. So, you never know when anybody's working.
This leads us to another point, doesn't it? I don't know whether it's Brad or John on this one. John, we haven't heard from you for a little while. If you are working from home, are you more inclined, you think, to sort of take it on as a 24/7 project? Whereas if you go into the office and all you have to do is then check your email, your in tray, if there was a physical one, you have work and home separate. That wouldn't necessarily be the case.
Yeah, I think switching off is one of the challenges from work from home that people face. But we do also get requests to work outside normal office hours, especially when children are involved. We also have offices around the world in New York and Sydney, so there's often need to have phone calls outside or video conferences outside of normal office hours. So there's pros and cons, but yeah, it's much easier to switch off when you're going on a commute, and that's sort of the end of the day. Much harder to do it when your laptop's sitting next to you. So that's definitely a challenge for a lot of people, and definitely.
Okay, and if you're working from home, how would you avoid getting into that sort of mess?
I think going for a walk, going outside, is a really good way of separating the work and home life, sort of resets your sort of attitude in your mind, and probably having a little bit of discipline and rules that you're not always checking your emails, and you actually got some scheduled downtime as well, especially when you've got family.
What do you think? This is for each one of you. I'll come to you first of all, Brad. Are there any industries, businesses, let's put it that way, other than, let's say, obvious manufacturing industries, that can't be done from home? You couldn't make a car from home, could you? But I mean, are there any other obvious exceptions?
I think even across most industries, I think there's probably certain jobs that don't lend themselves well to working from home. There is some evidence that if you, for example, really want to drive creativity and innovation, those really intimate interactions with coworkers, the informal conversations, just bumping into somebody in the hallway, is really critical for creativity. So we've seen companies here in the U.S. kind of pull their marketing people back into the office because they really feel like that's important to creativity. So I think across industries, you're going to find jobs that maybe don't lend themselves as well as to remote work as some others.
That's for the obvious reason that you can't be as creative unless you sort of have spark some other people, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that you can't be. I think there's just the idea that it's easier if you're in the office. And again, because a lot of creativity comes from spontaneous, unscripted interactions, just running into somebody, having a conversation, it sparks a new idea or connects different ideas. That's something that's hard to formalize,
Yeah.
if you're working remotely. So it could be done, but you'd have to be really, structured and orchestrating it.
Erica, you've been dying to say something. Go
Yeah,
on.
I have, because I work largely with the creative, cultural, and tech sector in the UK, and I think that probably 100% of my clients are in that group. And 95% of the creative sector in the UK are freelancers or micro businesses who are very used to working at home or in very, very tiny groups rather than in large organisations. And yet they make up the second largest sector in the UK economy. So I think that Brad's absolutely right that they come together in small teams and clusters to do projects, and then they spin out and go on to different teams and different clusters. So meeting is important for creativity, but you have to be massively, massively self-generating in order to take part within that economy. And of course, that's been being heavily thumped at the moment um, because there is lack of support for freelancers in the UK stimulus
And of course,
at the moment.
if you are the center of your own world and your clients, if you like, are at the end of all the spokes, you have to be flexible enough to stay from home and go to them when needed, but you have to be part of your own central base, don't you?
Yes, you do. I mean, the creative industries are really good at it. If you think about a film, for example, most of the people on that film will be freelance. Very few are employed by companies, and you'll all come together, do the project, and then split up again, which is completely different, maybe from a band who all work together, play together, and generally stick together. So all different parts of the creative economy work very differently. But the other set of people who can't work from home, of course, are the essential workers, sometimes called the unskilled workers, which I think is deeply unfair. But all the people that we're relying on at the moment to deliver food, to look after our healthcare, to make sure that the bins still are cleared, these are essential workers, and they are unable to work from home.
And do
And
you
we
think?
really need to think about them.
Absolutely, we must. John, anybody, but you first of all, John, do you think we're seeing a watershed moment here?
Yes, I definitely think. I'm not sure if it'll be a watershed moment, but it'll accelerate what was naturally happening in the office jobs. I still think a hybrid, solution is the best solution, where there is the flexibility to work from home, but there's also the opportunity to come into a hub and a hot desk and meet up with colleagues. So I think one thing that is also good about work from home is the ability to hire employees outside of your normal hub. So our hub is central London. There's obviously a lot of people outside London, that's outside the commuter belt. And so for employers, if you upskill and are better at supporting employees working from home, it opens up the pool of people you can actually employ. So you can employ which might be, a few hours from London and working from home. So I think it will open some eyes to opportunities to run businesses more effectively and to have a different.
Yeah, you make a very interesting point, and I'll put this one to Brad. If people are working from home, and let's say you're a company with 150 different employees all working from different locations, your HR department is going to have to deal with 150 different sets of physical and logistical circumstances, as opposed to 150 people in the same office where they're all told to abide by the same rules. Makes your life a bit more difficult.
It does, but I also think, again, companies that do it well have very formalized processes in place. They sit down with employees before they work remotely. They often have extensive contracts that lay out kind of the conditions of what that looks like. They have different agreements so that everybody's on the same page. They often have standards in terms of what the home office how it needs to be set up, for example. So the goal is, of course, there's going to be maybe more variability than you get when everybody's in the office, but the goal is to try to standardize it as much as possible so that you can reduce some of that variability across employees.
And imagine the fun of the office party at the end of the year when you were all actual strangers and you came to meet for the first time. There would be a certain frisson, would there not? John and Brad are talking about companies here. Erica, let me ask you about if somebody is, as you've highlighted, very much on their own and trying to sell their services. You gave us the first couple of points about what you think somebody should do. Be organized, make sure you have a timetable, don't have disorder in your day. What are the other most important things that somebody on their own should learn?
Well, I work completely on my own, but you end up with a network of people, and relying on that network and communicating with each other is really important. You know, mental health for people who work on their own is nobody looks after you except yourself. That's why you need to rely on, you know, I will support colleagues and clients who work on their own. There are all sorts of different organizations that you can get together with, and I think these are really important. Whether receiving a newsletter or just touching in with somebody there is a good way of dealing with it.
Why do you think there's added strain then?
Well, because you don't have anybody, you know, when you're in the office, if you're having a bit of a bad day or a client resigns, you can all sort of sit there and go, well, you know, we've had a bad day. Well, pick yourself up. You know, we can all work out what went wrong and talk about it. Whereas when you're by yourself, you know, if you lose a client, is it the end of the world? There are some small businesses who are very reliant on one major client, or who don't have, you know, 6 months' money in the bank. So all of those issues really can stress people quite considerably, not surprisingly.
Okay, you're going to have to employ psychologists as well as HR managers then, Brad, although you might argue that they're one and the same.
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, to Erica's point, I think, you know, isolation is a real, you know, kind of risk of working remotely. So I think both HR, you know, people leading remote teams, they really need to be conscious of that. They need to check in with their employees probably more frequently. They need to, you know, take extra steps. For example, seeing companies do things like virtual, you know, coffee breaks where everybody can just get online and, you know, connect over, you know, whatever might be going on, work or non-work. And so again, these things might occur naturally if you're all in the office, but when you're not, you need to be a little bit more, you know, formal about kind of curating those experiences and those touch points.
John, what do you want to add?
Yeah, so we had video trivia and beers on last Friday, to sort of keep that social interaction going and have a bit of fun.
So tell me, how did that work? Everybody got themselves a beer at home. Yeah, and then
that's right.
Yeah, yes. Carry on.
Or drink of choice, and there's online trivia tools that, you know, for $20 a month, where you can run interactive trivias, so everyone can answer the questions on their phone, and it's sort of competitive, but everyone has a bit of a laugh as well. So that's why the technology is so good these days, that you can have 30 people on a video call, and have that bit of social interaction as well.
Just practically, is it easy to get 30 people on a video call, or do you have to have special equipment? If so, throw a tip out there for people.
Yeah, no, we use Zoom, which you've probably seen in the press, because obviously been a lot of talk about the companies that are benefiting from the work from home. And we have hundreds of people at a time. We have 400 employees, and we do have all company meetings. Some people are asleep because of the time zones, but we'll have a couple of hundred.
Well, you can see that at least if it's a video conference. Erica, do we have Zoom or something similar in the UK?
Yeah, we do. And in fact, yeah, several of my clients use it. And so I think I was on a Zoom call this morning, and I've got another one tomorrow morning. So, yes.
Oh, well, that's great fun. Where do you think the future lies, Brad?
I think, you know, as John said earlier, you know, this working from home has been accelerating, both in terms of the number of employers that have been offering it, but also in terms of the amount of time that people spend working from home. It's been, you know, increasing. It used to be maybe just a day here and there. Now about a third of workers, you know, spend 80% or more of their time working from home. So I think this is likely to accelerate that, and again, break down some of those myths that maybe have prevented the wider adoption of remote work.
And do you enjoy it, each one of you? You first, Brad. When you're working at home, is it more fun than being in the office or the university?
I like both. I think, as John said, the hybrid for me, I do carve out days where I like to work at home because I can really think, I can write, I can do those solitary activities. But I also get a lot of energy and ideas from interacting with my coworkers on the university campus. Obviously, I have to be in the classroom to teach when I'm teaching. So for me, I really like, kind of mixing it up and going back and forth between the two.
Okay, John, what do you prefer?
I actually prefer the office, but I do work from home as well quite a bit. But I like a lot of the micro interactions that are easier to do in real life than online. We're totally set up anywhere there's a laptop I can work.
Erica, it's time to dispel the idea that people who say, look, I want to spend a day at home doing a bit of work today, to dispel the idea that they are skivers.
They are so not skivers. The other brilliant thing that actually we haven't factored into this conversation too is that there are so many people who are at home and who could maybe work 3-4 hours a day from home. So carers and people like that, people who are less able, who we can tap into as an economy that can't always get to the office. And we're just not using that amazing resource that every single country, every single town has. So this could be, a real game changer for people like that too.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. You have not felt in the slightest bit remote to me, so we appreciate that. Brad, Erica, John, thank you for your contribution. From me, David Foster, thank you for watching. Hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.